All right, so the next topic in question, hoisting. Hoisting is not like a super important, essential knowledge for you to be able to program and program well, but frequently there are questions about hoisting at job interviews. So even if this is going to be the sole purpose of learning, then it's kind of worth exploring and knowing what hoisting does and what it is. And we did mention a few things before, but today we'll talk some more about hoisting. And before we get into that, so one thing, the code is read from the top to the bottom. So line 1, then line 2, line 3, and so on and so on and so on until it's finishing. It's going to finish reading the code. And the second thing is that before the code is actually executed, so the engine parses through the code looking for declarations, errors, and declarations are going to be key to our understanding of hoisting. So hoisting is moving part of the declaration to the beginning of the scope. Another term here, scope. This is actually super important, so it's going to be our next topic. And it's going to fill you out on this, what I cannot explain today because scope is something that we didn't cover just yet. But when you understand scope, then everything will be clear about how hoisting works as well. But for now, let's just make sure you memorize that hoisting is moving the declarations to the beginning of the scope. Let's say here we've got the whole global scope, so that declaration would be moved right to the top, to line 1 here. If the scope was a function scope, like in here, so the declaration from here would be moved to line 40. But this isn't something that you need to know right away. It's just that this is going to be this missing piece of information for hoisting. But let's focus on hoisting and let's understand how it works first. So as I said, hoisting, moving the declaration up. And here I've declared 6 variables, all using different keywords. So we've got const, we've got let, and we've got var. Here I'm presenting, is for the presentation purposes again, showing you that it doesn't matter what kind of data type is going to be assigned as a value to a variable. It can be a number, it can be a string, it can be a boolean, it could be an array object, or an object, or a function object. It doesn't matter. What matters is the keyword that we're going to use to create our variable. So if we use const or let, the hoisting, let's just say hoisting doesn't happen. It does happen for const and let, but in a different way. So what we are focusing on here is variables created with the keyword var. So all you gotta remember from today is that if you create a variable with the keyword var, it's going to behave differently. If you can recall, variables created with the keyword var were the only option up until 2015 when the new ECMAScript came in live. And so the creators of the language decided that was not, clearly it was not a good idea. Hence, it's no longer applicable to let and const. It only will happen with var. And so I've got those 6 variables created here, declared and initialized with the value. And here I've got 6 console logs So here I'm going to try console log one by one and see what happens. So I'm going to uncomment this, save it. And as you can see in the console, reference error, cannot access type number before initialization. So here I've got the variable created with the keyword const, and you cannot access that type number. Type number is the name of our variable, and you cannot access it before initialization. So as you can see, those are created afterwards. I'm trying to access its value, and I cannot access the value of type const number 20 because it doesn't exist just yet. So none of those really should exist in those console logs. So none of those should show any value because I'm trying to access something before I put this into live. So this doesn't exist yet. And I'm getting this reference error that it hasn't been initialized, and I'll explain in just a second. So this is throwing an error. Type string, the same error. You cannot access its value before initialization. Let's check type boolean and see what happens. So here, there is no error. What we get is undefined. Type boolean false has been declared with the keyword var, meaning the hoisting applies to this variable. And what hoisting does is that it kind of splits this into two. As you remember, creating variables is a two-step process. Even if it's in one line, it's still a two-step process. So basically, I've got variable type boolean, and then without the keyword var, type boolean equals false. So basically, this is a declaration, and this is initialization. And what hoisting does for us, it's like it doesn't actually physically move anything, but I'm just going to show it in order to like kind of visually aid understanding of the process. So this has been moved now to the beginning of our code here. But if we declare our variable without any value, it will receive automatically, it will receive a value of undefined. So here the code is being parsed, the engine is going, the interpreter is reading, interpreting data. And so I've got, it stops on line 14. Here, I've got console log type boolean. It says, okay, at my first reading, I found that variable type boolean and I moved it to the top, but I never took its value. So the value is still here on the line 23. It's only moved the declaration. Like kind of, because it's not really happening, but we can imagine that this is what happens, and that's why we get this undefined in our console when we're trying to console log our variable. Cool. Next, console log array. Save. Array. Variable array has also been created with the use of a keyword var. So we also get undefined, and a similar process is happening. So basically it splits this into two. The declaration, only the declaration is moved to the top, and here we only, and on the line 24 stays the value, but the value is not, it doesn't actually exist when we try to console log. So it's also gonna throw undefined, or not throw, we say throw for errors. And it's gonna console log undefined because it's undefined at this moment to the interpreter. Let's try console log object. Object was created with the keyword let, and again we are getting an error because it cannot access its value. And to be sure, console log not this but this, sorry about that. Save it. So again we're getting an error because this has been created with a keyword const. Let's comment this again and let's summarize. The value assigned to the variable is irrelevant, so it doesn't matter. It could be a number, string, boolean, as you've seen them all. And the way of declaring, so meaning what the keyword used in order to create a variable, is important. So if you used const or let, the hoisting is not going to apply. If you created a variable using a keyword var, this is important because then hoisting will happen. It will be undefined. If you create a variable a var and try to use it before declaring it, it will exist, but it will be assigned the value of undefined. And last thing to remember, only the declaration is hoisted. So its value is left behind and it cannot be accessed, so it's going to be undefined. If we have declared a variable with const or let and try to use it beforehand, it won't even be undefined. It's just going to throw an error. Because I said const and let are not hoisted, they are hoisted. They are just in the temporal dead zone. So until they're initialized with a value, they will be in this temporal dead zone, TDZ. And I don't think it's worth going into a lot of detail there. It's just worth knowing that hoisting does happen, and it happens with variables, with var. And second thing, before we go on and talk about scope, is that functions can also be hoisted, or actually are hoisted. So for instance, we talked about how we create different kinds of functions, and if we have a function declaration like in here, so I've got a keyword function, then the name of our function, and the body of the function. So this whole thing is a declaration, and so the whole thing will be hoisted, and it will be hoisted before our variables. So there is a different order for hoisting, and functions go first. But the point is, this whole thing will also be hoisted. So before we can use it before it is declared. Let's just check. Named function. Let's call our function. And as you can see, there is no error. I tried console logging, I'm here, and we can see that text in the console. So all is good. You can use our function declaration, named function, before it even exists. Let's comment this out so we don't see it. And if we create functions using function expressions, so we have like the same like with normal variables. So we have a function const. Here I've created those names because I thought it would be easier to associate. So go function const created with the use of a keyword const, and the same with let, function let, and var, function var. So here things work a little differently, and it's more like with those in here. So basically, if you create a function and assign this value to a const, it's not going to be hoisted. It's going to throw an error. And also with the keyword let. So this function cannot be called before. It will throw an error. Don't take my word for it. I'm gonna uncomment this, save it, and you can see there is an uncut reference error because we cannot access function const before initialization. It's moving only the declaration again to the top and leaving the value behind, so it hasn't been initialized to our interpreter. Comment. Let's see what function let will do. Save it. Uncut reference error, cannot access function let JS48, so we cannot call this function because it still hasn't been initialized to the program. What do you think should happen if we try calling function var? Any ideas? So I've got a type error. Function var is not a function. This is interesting, right? So basically what happens here is that the function declaration, so the declaration has been moved and it has been assigned a value of undefined as the same as it happened with the var type boolean and the var array here. So it has been moved. This part, the declaration has been moved. It has been assigned for the value of undefined, and it's the same as if we tried calling undefined. So undefined is not a function. And here we are not trying to execute whatever is the function doing, but we are kind of like just doing undefined and execute, which will never work because this is not the right way to do it. Let's just be sure console log my function var. So as you can see, I'm getting undefined. So this is function var has a value of undefined, and that's why we're getting this error. It was a short, nice topic to discuss. What I'd like you to remember is that there was a reason why people who created and are responsible for the standards of JS have removed hoisting as such from let and const, and so it doesn't work this way anymore for the new variables. It was impossible to change anything about how var works because, as we talked about, JS is a backward compatible language, meaning whatever worked in the past has to still be applicable because there are too many programs to be rewritten, and so it has to stay, but it doesn't mean that we cannot move further into the future using better solutions. So because of that, I think it's best to avoid using variables created with the keyword var and perhaps even the function declarations, even though I think the syntax is pretty nice because it's very neat and clear, easy to read, but it might be confusing in some way. So hoisting is not something we should look forward to or should abuse, but we need to be aware of the fact that it's happening. And now on to scope. Cool. For this, I need your full attention. This is a little difficult to understand at first, and even a bit later on. And it can be very confusing, especially when the code is becoming very complex and hundreds of lines. So I really need your full focus and full attention on the topic of scope. What is scope? Scope is like a range in your code, and it's very important because when you declare your variables, they can be, depending on where they've been declared, they can be either seen or not seen, accessed or not accessed. And it's not like with hoisting that it goes from the top to the bottom, so you move something upwards. No, it's actually about the where in the lexical sense where it has been declared and within the function or within the block scope, and etc. So for instance, we have a global scope and a local scope, and depending on whether it's a local scope or a global scope, and also what kind of variable has been used, it will determine whether you can access this variable later on in your code and what kind of data will be accessed. So I'm going to show everything with the examples, but again, full attention at this point. So yes, there are lots of different ranges in our program. Each block function creates its own scope, and also not only that, but they can be nested one within another one and multiple times. So it can become very, very complex. So let's start simple. Let's talk about the global scope. It's outside of blocks and functions. These will be discussed a little bit later. I'm gonna split these into smaller parts so that you're not overwhelmed and that you can go through those chunks one by one, making sure you understand each one before moving on to the next one. The global scope, the most fun, the highest order, the highest level of space. And so for instance, I've created those 3 variables here, each one with a different keyword. So we've got a var user ID, const color ID, and a let user age. And now let's try console logging user ID. I've got 102. Fine, no problem. A variable has been declared, it has been initialized, and there is no problem console logging its value. It's the same with the const color ID. Again, we can see the value of that variable, and exactly same thing with the user age. So we can access all of those values. These have been declared in the global scope in the highest of orders, and we can access them right away. What happens if I try assigning a new value to user ID and then console logging it? Or I'm gonna hide those console logs so there are not too many values in the console. Cool. So now I changed the value of a user ID from 102 to 200, and we can see the new value in the console. Because using var doesn't create any sort of problems with assigning new value. At this point you may think, oh great, because there is no error, but bear in mind that if you create another variable or the same variable and try adjusting the data but without fully understanding of how it works, there will be no error. So there will be no information that you are trying. Maybe you will think that you're trying to do something, but your colleague has done something before and you haven't communicated very well. So this creates mess already, but let's not focus on that. I'm gonna try to give a new value to color ID that has been created with the keyword const. What should happen here? It should throw an error because you cannot assign to constant variable. So this has been declared with a value and you cannot alter its value at a later point. You have to, if you want to do something, you have to either directly change it in here or create a new variable. So this is kind of protection from creating mess, unwanted mess. Uncomment user age 21, and let's try, let's firstly comment this out so we don't stop at error, and let's see if this works. Cool, so now both console logs working here because we can reassign variable with var, and we can also reassign a new value to a variable created with the keyword let. So we need to be fully aware of when we use let and when we use const in order not to create any chaos in our code. Cool, so this is pretty pleasant because it's something like we've already been covering. And now, variables declared in the global scope are visible everywhere in the program, also in other scopes. So for instance, here I've created this very nice mini function that's show name, and its purpose is to console log the username, so meaning getting inside a variable and its value, console logging its value. What do you think should happen here? This is a no-brainer because don't pay attention to anything that is still commented out. You cannot see it. Imagine it's not there. So I only have the simple function show name and a console log and the username as a variable used of what I want to console log. So even though this is inside a function here, it's going to go outside, find this username from here, access its value, Rachel, and this is exactly what should be printed in the console. So we've got Rachel, because it only found one. If it doesn't find anything within its local scope, because this is local scope, function scope, creates its own local scope, it's going to go outside looking for the username. So I like this analogy where you say, okay, I'm in my room, but I can always go to the common area and get something from the living room or from the kitchen or from the outside. But unwanted guests are not always welcome in my home, so outside cannot get inside. But this is going to be covered in detail later on, so don't worry. So for instance, now I'm going to uncomment this const username Janice. And what do you think should happen now? So if you expected an error, error is not going to happen this time because this const username, even though it's exactly the same name, is a completely different variable. This is what scope does, and that's why it's so important to understand, because if it was in the same scope, like this const color ID, trying to reassign a new value in here would throw an error because you cannot do it and it's the same scope. It's possible in here because this const username, Rachel, is in the global scope, but Janice is in its own local scope, meaning it's like a completely different separate entity, and it's not we trying to reassign a new value to the username, but it's just a completely different variable. Or, yeah. Now, another puzzle. I'm gonna uncomment the username without the keyword const. So what do you think should happen this time? I'm gonna save the program, and this time I am getting an error, assignment to constant variable at show name, because here I actually am trying to reassign a new value to the same const. So once I had keyword const here, I was creating a completely new variable in its local scope. Here, the program is finding this const first, and here you can see that I'm trying to give a new value, but to the same variable. So it's throwing an error. You can see it's line 38, and it's here. The problem is here. I cannot reassign const with a new value because it's about this const from here. Right. So this is this mini intro to global, local scope, and this mini function here. And okay, maybe last one thing. Let's console log username. Let's uncomment this one. So here I've got function and console log username, and I've declared an initialized username with Janice, but I also have a const username initialized with the value of Rachel. And at the very end, I'm trying to console log the username. So have a guess, and what should happen? Should it find the one that is in the global scope, or should it take the last one it has used? Well, it's gonna find Rachel. This Janice is from line 39. So it's this console log here. So function show name has found its own username within its local scope, and that's what you can see on the line on the first console log, that is Janice. And then our instruction from line 43 is showing the console log username from the global scope. Whoops. Rachel, because this one is taken from the global scope. It's not going to go inside here, inside the function. And that's all for the introduction purposes. A new topic ahead of us. We're going to introduce objects, but because there is a completely separate big chunk of the course devoted to only us talking about object-oriented programming, here we are only going to touch on the surface. I'm going to introduce the main concept, the main idea behind objects, and the syntax, because syntax, understanding syntax and knowing how to use the correct syntax is very essential, and it helps free the resources to actually focus on the high level thinking rather than think where should be the assignment operator, where should go the semicolon, where should be the colon, or how to access the property. So these things we are going to focus on now, and I'm hoping that it's going to be like this very smooth transition into more advanced stuff, like the architecture of the project, of your application, and so on. So JS is kind of funny because when introducing JS to someone who's just starting learning JS, it's hard to explain what an object is, because we say pretty much everything is an object. And it's true, because apart from the simple data types, pretty much everything else is an object. When we say function is an object, array is an object, I have to make one distinction here. So there is like this, I would call it a parent figure object that is on the very, very top, and it has its subtypes. So function is one of the subtype, array is another subtype, and there is also the general object, which is also a subtype of this bigger object, parent figure. And I know it might be a little bit confusing at the beginning, but I'm hoping that at the end of this course you'll just feel that it's very natural, you'll be using your intuition to understand, and you won't feel like this isn't right, because you will just feel like this is exactly the way it should be. Cool. First thing, I'm going to introduce like a mini definition, because an object is an unordered list of properties consisting of a name and a value. So we often refer to it as the key value pair, and it's an unordered list. Unlike the array, in the array we refer to index. Every element has its index, and the index is really important. Here, the order in which you're going to introduce new properties doesn't matter completely. The value of this property can be of any type. It can be a number, it can be a string, it can be an array. And if the value is a function, then we say that this property is a method. And at the end of function part 3, we made some like mini intro to see the difference between the methods and functions. So we know that every method belongs to an object, and every method is a function, but not every function is a method, just like that. And the first thing that we are going to focus on is how to create an object. In its basic form, we can use a new operator and then object constructor. So this is a function that when we call it, you can see that we have a pair of parentheses at the end, and it's always a signal to the interpreter, to the program, that we want to execute a function. So running this function, spelled with the capital O, and using the new keyword, will create a new object that we are assigning, because we're using the assign operator here, to our new const cat. So cat is now the most basic object that you can see, that you will ever see. You can see the curly braces, and this is the indication that this is an object and currently an empty one. If we expand an arrow here, you can see that the prototype is pointing at the object as well. So we know this is definitely an object. If you don't want to have an empty object, we need to learn how to assign properties to it. And the way to do it is to use, for instance, a dot notation. So here, as with like any other object, where if we want to work on it, we have to specify that we want to work on this cat element, then we're using the dot notation, and we are introducing a new property. In this case, it's going to be the name for our cat. By the assignment operator, we are passing a value. So the cat's name is going to be Mr. Whiskers. And if we are going to call cat again, you can see in the console that it's now an object with one property, just name set to Mr. Whiskers. Exactly what we've done here on the line 14. And the dot notation is not the only way of how we can assign properties to our objects. We can also use an kind of like, this is not an array notation, but we're using the square brackets, and inside we can pass the name of a new property. It's just, we need to remember that we are passing this name as a string. So remember about the quotation marks. And let's say we wanted to set our cat age to 2. And now our cat has 2 properties, both name and age. So it's up to you. And on line 16, by the comparison, I've placed cat.age also equal to 2. And both ways are doing the exact same thing. This is exactly the same thing. It's just dot notation is, I would say, a little bit neater and definitely faster because you have to type less. And I would say it's probably more common. Something like this you'll see more often in your code or in other people's code than the other notation using the square brackets. But both are legal ways to create new properties for an object. And before we go any further, I wanted to make you aware that if you felt like creating a new property consisting of 2 words separated by the white space, you are also allowed to do it. In my personal opinion, I wouldn't recommend it because I feel like this is introducing a chaos, but I'm so used to seeing a camel case or at least an underscore. I wouldn't do it, but if you personally feel like this is what you want, then you can do it. It's just that what you need to remember about, you can later, if you wanted to access it and you wanted to use a dot notation, you would get an error because this isn't a correct syntax. If you wanted to access this property, you'd have to again use the same notation. So the square brackets and inside here, inside as a string, the eye color. And then no problem, right? People often get a little bit confused and they start with a dot and the square bracket, but we are .h. This is not allowed syntax. So it's either a dot notation or the square brackets. So you have to pick one. And the last thing concerning the methods, methods are like any other property that you are introducing. So again, we are working on the cat element, our cat object. We're using dot notation, the name of the property, and then the only difference is that the value is storing a function. And the function looks like an anonymous function that we've been creating, and I hope we are feeling comfortable with this syntax. Basically, this is our method. Method called meow, storing a function that is supposed to just console log meow meow. And cool. If we wanted to call this method, we're doing cat.meow. If we do not place the parentheses at the end, so we're just accessing the value of this property this way, you can see that f, which stands for a function, and the body of our function, which is console log meow meow. So just like any other property, but the value is a function, so this property is going to be called a method. A method belongs to an object. Right. If we wanted to execute this, we'll have to place the parentheses at the end, and we are seeing the console log message. Cool. Another way to create our object is by the use of an object literal. So the object literal is the curly braces, and array literal is the square brackets. So we know that this is like the fastest way to create something rather than the use of the constructor here. And in this case, your object isn't worse than the object literal. It's just different. And we often will just create, let's say, const. We want to create a hamster and assign it to curly braces. And this is already us creating a hamster object. So hamster already exists in the program as an object. You can see an empty one, just curly braces. If we expand, you can see that the prototype is object. And oftentimes when people go with the object literal, they, instead of like introducing new properties by the dot notation, they would just place those pairs of key value straight away inside that object. I'm just going to remove this because we have an example with a dog that I've already created a dog object, and you can see that it's storing a few properties. So this is the name and this is the value. So this is the key value pair, number 1, number 2, and so on. The order doesn't matter. We could just make it the other way around, and the dog, it wouldn't change a thing for a dog object as such, because there is no index, no position, nothing like this. And the syntax here is essential. So something that you really have to memorize by heart. So we're opening the curly braces right after we declare our variable where we want to store our object. We are assigning it with the curly braces, and inside curly braces goes the name of the property. Here it's called name, then colon. Rather than going with an assignment operator, which is also like very common to mistake, we are going with a colon, the name of the value. So the value passed, it might be the number, it can be a string, etc. And then a comma. If you forget about the comma, you will get an error right away. You will see that there's a red underline and you'll wonder what happened. But so it's like, it looks like a teeny detail, but to JS, it's very important that we place that comma at the end if we are introducing another property to our object. If you don't, like for instance, this is the last property. In here, this comma is not obligatory. So you can either leave it or you can remove it and there will be no errors and nothing in red. So it's really up to you. Some people leave it, some people don't. You have to decide on your own style, how you like it better, because we don't know what is the correct way. Both are correct because there is no error. Right, so we have name, we have age, we have this eye color. Again, here, if you wanted to pass it as the name of the property, you can do it with the white space, but it has to be introduced just like I did here in strings. And last thing, we see our famous methods. And up until 2015, this was the only way to create a method. So a function for the object. So the name of the property, colon, and inside here an anonymous function. So function keyword, parentheses, and in the curly braces the body of the function. Which in this case is a console log to woof woof. But since ECMAScript 6, and I'm not saying any of these is better or worse, it's just the newer is like by the rule they create shorter stuff. So I guess this is the direction that the JS is going for, to make things shorter, maybe easier this way. But we have the name, squeaking, straight away the parentheses, so we don't have any function keyword here, and in the curly braces the body of the function. Cool. And if we decide to go with this way and we create our object right away with some properties and methods, we are in no way limited to just stick to what we've created. We can dynamically add and change properties. So for instance, our dog got castrated or it wasn't castrated, and we said we introduced a new property, castrated, and we set it to false. Instead here, you can see that it's false, storing a value of false. But if we now wanted to say that our dog is now castrated and we want to change it to true. If we again try to access the property or the value that is being stored by this property, we see that it's now true. If our dog had kids, we can introduce this as an array. They had 2 baby girls and 1 boy, and our dog will have this property now as an array. So we can also pass values as an array. You can see that we're not limited in any way. Undefined. Why is it undefined? I'm saving it. Okay, because later I'm deleting it. So save it, and you can see that the dog children property is storing an array of Bobby, Gigi, and Bonnie. Cool. So again, if you created your object, you can then modify it and influence on those values. Doesn't matter. You're not limited in any way, and it's something important because in one of the projects, definitely in one, maybe more, we are going to use objects and we are going to use them, like we will be modifying them throughout the work of our application. So it's important to realize and remember that these are not set in stone. We can change them throughout, add new ones, and also delete some, because here I've already shown you if our dog's kids went to their new homes and we wanted to remove this property because our dog didn't have children anymore, and then we could remove it, and instead we would get undefined. So this property would no longer exist on the dog object. So the keyword here is delete, and we can delete anything we want from the object, as well as adding and modifying. And so I've already shown you, but I'm going to show you again. If we wanted to access and not assign a new value, but just access the dog age, we can just do dog.age, and it's going to print out, or because we wanted to console log it, it's going to console log the value that is currently being stored under the dog age. I'm going to save it, and dog age is 9, and this is correct. If we change it to, I don't know, just maybe 4, we'll see that it's been updated and we can access it at every given moment. Cool. And as far as those methods are concerned, they look different at the stage of creating, but when we want to execute our method, it's exactly the same thing. So basically we work on the dog element because this method belongs to the object. We need to specify the element that we want to perform this method on. So this is a dog.barking, and the parentheses because we want to execute the method. And the squeaking, which looked different because it had different body, is executed in exact same way. So if I hit save now and I'm going to run those two methods, we'll see the console log message of woof woof and the squeaking message of ow. Owie. I don't know if this is a very good squeaking sound, but let's say it is. I'm just gonna comment this out so our console is clean, and I've prepared an example. So we have an object called result. It only has one property value, which is currently set to 1. And we also have a function called plus, and the only job of our function plus is to take the result value and increment it by 1. So every time I'm going to execute method plus, our value from the result, this value from here, should be incrementing. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to call plus, and you can see that the return statement is added. So we can see that printed in the console. And if we now try to access the result value, you can see that it's been incremented to 2. And if we call it again, plus, it's been added, and our result dot value is now set to 3. So as you can see, we can create functions that will modify the inside of our objects. So those properties are again not set in stone. We can modify them by the use of our functions, which now may sound a little bit abstract, but then when we get to this high level thinking, this has to be already like the natural thing for you, something you don't think about, but you just know, and you can focus and direct your resources at those more complex, high level architectural thinking stuff. And I'm not exaggerating. So let's get the basics right straight away. And you can see that I'm getting inside the function. I'm making reference to the value that belongs to the result. So this is pretty much the same as if we created a global variable in the global scope, also called value, and let's set it to 1 as well. Save it, and here I can modify my value from the function. A function is now responsible for incrementing both the value in the result, but also the value that has been declared in the global scope. And save it. I'm going to execute plus function now. Printed added, so it means that everything went okay. Our result value is now 2, and the value is also 2. But this value has nothing to do with this value from here. This one belongs to the global scope, and this value is the property belonging to our result object. But we can modify them like by the use of our function. Worth remembering. And the other example number 2, is to introduce something that is at the very beginning, always very, like, I don't know how to say it, frightening, because how can you name this in your program and you know what it means when it always means something else? So many people have problem with this, but this is just like to make a point that there is something called this, and throughout our project I'm gonna make like a mini tiny remarks and kind of expanding on this what I'm gonna say today. And later on in ROP part we will have like maybe an hour we will talk about just this keyword, this. So brace yourself. Here we have a const called counter, and we can see that this is also an object. Inside our counter object we have a property called score set to 0, and then a method called increment created the old-fashioned way, so the colon and then keyword, function keyword, and the body of the function. So what we want to do here is that we want to increment this score. And so normally, like from what I said before, that would make better sense to see something like this. And then if we want to console log the result of as incrementing the score, also counter score. Because you can see that every time I said if you want to access the property that belongs to an object, you need to specify the name of an object that you're working on, and we are currently working on the counter. So we want to get inside the counter to its score property. We want to increment this score by 1, and we also want to console log the new score. And this is also okay. It's just here at the line 86, I'm gonna execute our increment method. Increment is a function, but it belongs to a counter, so it's a method, and if we want to call increment function, we need to call it on the counter. So we need to access the object first, use the dot notation, and then call the actual method. So I'm going to save it. And you can see that the score has been increased to 1. And I'm going to call it in here again. Counter increment. And it's now 2. If I execute it again, we have 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and so on and so on. So basically, this isn't wrong. It's just that when we get to this real stuff, we will have to understand that there is this keyword that is everywhere, and basically it acts as if we were saying work on the element that you're currently in. So we are working on the counter, and using this will point at the context, and it's working in the context of counter. I know this is like, it feels like it might be too much, but we are currently inside the counter, so this is pointing at the counter context. So this is pretty much as if we were saying counter. And in this like a tiny little program, it might not matter because it's just one object, and the only thing that we want to do in here is we want to increment the score here. So it doesn't seem like it has much sense to introduce this, but when things get complex and more complicated, you will see after like many more like hours really, when you try to understand how this works, that it's actually a very, very helpful thing. And I guess not on this level, not just yet. I promise you that it's gonna get like one of the most helpful tools you'll find in JS. Cool. So this is pretty much everything I had to say about objects. Just touching on the surface. So this all sounds very pleasant. This is the pleasant part where you don't have to like exercise your brain yet. It's just about memorizing the syntax. And I do recommend that you try like memorizing how we write down those things and see the difference between this method and this method, so that later on when you see things in other people programs, it's not gonna feel like awkward thing, but you'll feel like, okay, I get it, it's familiar. And also when you start writing and typing, you will see that often you don't remember, was it a curly brace? Oh yeah, I must have been. Or you will very often see it as a natural thing to put an assignment operator, but it doesn't take an assignment operator, it's a colon. And here you'll feel like you always want to place a semicolon, because we always expected, and there was so much drilling about placing a semicolon at the end of each line, but here actually a comma. So something to just sleep on and do lots of typing so that your fingers kind of think for you and you can focus on like things that really matter. Cool. Thanks for watching. Now, topic of a template string. I feel like this is a very pleasant one. I would say simple, but I don't want to label some topics as very simple as some others as very difficult, because maybe if you find yourself struggling with the template string, you will say, okay, she said it was supposed to be simple. Well, the beginning is simple, and then as with anything and everything, it gets a little bit complicated. But at the end of the day, template string is a very helpful tool, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy using it in your programs. So in its most basic form, it's not really like fascinating. and we cannot see its magic. So it can produce a string like any other string. So we can use single quotation marks, we can use double quotation marks or backticks, and all of these will produce text as a string. So simple data type, right? So no magic here. But if we wanted to use a single or double quote inside our, for instance, our console, inside our string, then normally we would have to do something like this. So we would have to work with this backward slash, canceling the character, remembering what quotation marks we placed on the outside so that later on we could use the double quotation marks inside, again canceling this apostrophe, and the effect is okay. This is what we wanted, and maybe this isn't like really difficult or very complicated, but why bother with something like this when we can use a template string and just wrap it in backticks and have it all as we want it. So this is, again, it's going to produce the entire, exactly the same thing, the same string. I'm Only Human by Alexander the Great. This is the quotation from Alexander the Great. So I wanted to place it inside the double quotation marks, but there is also an apostrophe, and I don't have to think about what character to cancel and where to introduce this slash. I'm just placing everything inside the backticks, and the template string is doing the job. So very easy and very neat and a great solution. Maybe again, this isn't like the magic of a template string, but it's definitely helpful. I'm gonna comment this out and move on to a multi-line strings. So before ECMAScript 6 and before the introduction of backticks and a template string, we would have to do something like this. And we can see that the text is being printed on the new line. We used slash and end character, and it would move the next word onto the next line. But as of 2015, since we have the power string, template string, we can do something like this. And rather than reference error, yes, I've uncommented too much, save it. As of 2015, we can just hit enter, move on to the next line, and if we are wrapping our string in backticks, the program just understands that that was our intention to move to the next line. Super simple, and again, maybe not the reason why we love template string, but definitely helpful. And the cherry on the top, we can embed our JS code directly inside a string. So I've created here a variable called your name, which is storing a value of Jenny, and then created a greeting1 and greeting2. And the greeting1 is making the use of a template string. So we've got the ability to inject the code inside the string, and we're placing our text, whatever we want to say. And if we wanted to inject the value of our variable, we are using a $sign, curly braces, and inside those curly braces, the variable that we want to place inside our string. And save it. We could do it the same way we could achieve the same thing by concatenating. And I'm just going to print out greeting1, too much greeting, just greeting hi Jenny, and greeting2 is hello Jenny. So it's pretty much the same thing, but if you have a look at the structure, and this is just a very simple string that we wanted to produce here. You have hello, you have to wrap in quotation marks, then you have to use a plus operator to concatenate it to the value from your name variable. Again, plus operator. And then if you wanted to add an exclamation mark at the end, you would also have to wrap it in another pair of quotation marks. And with this very simple two words and an exclamation mark string, it seems like it's already a lot of work. And when it gets really long and extensive, it seems like a total headache. In our project, I'm going to make sometimes a comparison so you will see how sometimes it's difficult to get it right, get all those like quotation marks and pluses, and the entire thing becomes really long when you can just use one set of backticks, smoothly move on from the text to the value of your variable, and no headache of concatenating anything. I think very neat solution, very neat indeed. We also have the possibility to use the expression inside and operate on this expression. So for instance, this may seem like it's a little bit more complicated, but it really isn't. So I've got three variables created with const, user 1, user 2, and 3, and number, meaning their age. And inside the console log, I'm printing a string. It says average age of users is, and here inside, again by dollar and curly braces, I can inject the entire expression and add all of the users' ages and divide by 3, producing the average age. And then just like that, move on and finish off the sentence, and total age is, and again, inside here, like I'm on the go, creating the result of this string. Like rather than assigning it to another variable somewhere else, if you wanted to create a very simple program, calculating something depending on the data you receive, there you go. A solution on the go. And save it. And here we are. And maybe perhaps in a little bit more complex programs, this is something that you normally do. They would calculate the average age of users. Then it's so comforting to know that you can perform operations inside that string. Cool. I'm gonna comment this out as well and move on to the next thing that the template string can do, which is I'm gonna remove this before you see it. Get and display the current date. So I'm gonna uncomment this, save it, and you can see that the watch is currently showing date Wednesday, December the 1st, 2021. And I get it, maybe the format isn't like the ideal because it's not so very pleasing to the eye, but if we do, we can also execute methods inside here. If this is a method, so we can do also to local string. Do not forget about the pair of parentheses to execute the method. Save it, and very nice date showing December the 1st, 2021, and even the time. So another thing that we can do with our template string, rather than storing the local time somewhere, as soon as someone will execute this code, they get a new date right away. Another thing that we can do with our template string is calculation. And okay, this was also a calculation, but let's have a look again at a different kind. I'm gonna remove this as well and uncomment it. So here we've got a net price, a tax, and we wanted to calculate the brutto. So whatever is the price that you have to pay in the shop. So we start smoothly off with to pay, then again, we are injecting our calculation inside here. Using a $sign and curly braces, we can calculate the entire thing, which is price plus price times tax divided by 100, and we get how many dollars we would have to pay for this product. It is $99.61. And if we want to get rid of these decimal places, we would just, like, I've already wrapped it in the braces, but there you go. You'll have to rub this part in the braces and then perform two fixed on that expression. Like, yes, I placed the dots too early. Here we need it fixed. There we go. It cuts too much, so we need to place as a parameter, as a value, as an argument here to indicate that we want to keep 2 decimal places. Save it, and we've got a very nice round amount, $99.62. So another calculation that we can do inside our string on the go. And the ternary operator, which is like often at the beginning is a little bit causing some difficulties, but it's much better to make peace with the ternary operator. It's a type of a conditional because it has bright future in JS. It's very common. So today's net price is, and this is also referring to our like the previous one, the calculation. So today's net price is, in here we're actually inside our like template string, we're resolving this condition. So we inside here we need to put a $sign, curly braces, and inside curly braces we say if the price, so whatever is the value currently being stored under the price variable, if the price is higher or equal to 80, then if it's true, then execute the thing that you meet first after the question mark. And if this statement is evaluated to false, then go to the other thing after the colon and finish off the sentence with this. I'll save it and go, today's net price is high because it's 80.99. If we did 79.999, save it, today's net price is low. So it's dynamically adjusting, reading the condition and checking what's underneath the price. And again, something that can dynamically check the condition. And this syntax here of a ternary operator, something worth remembering. And also bear in mind that inside here, when we open the curly braces and we are injecting the values dynamically, if we want to use the end of our string, here we are wrapping in quotation marks. So that is a little bit of a complication, but still better than if we had to concatenate the entire thing. So I'm gonna comment this out. You might want to kind of like download the file and have a look at it and play with it on your own so that you actually get used to this ternary operator and the syntax. And the last thing, increment and decrement. So this is something that we can also do because of our template string inside our string. We've got 2 variables, item name and items. We know that we have 20 items of some TVs. And our console says, I just sold 1 and the name of the thing that you've just sold. And then we want to decrement our items by 1 and finish off the sentence with still in stock. Save it. Good, I just sold one LCD, 19 still in stock. And as a mini revision, what is happening here? We are doing the pre-decrementation. So normally, I don't know if there is a normally for you already, but very commonly we would see something like this, and this is just a decrementation. But if you do it this way, it will first display 20 and only then do the decrementation. So if we did something like this, we would see 20 still in stock, even though items are 19, because it firstly displays how much it was, and then doing the operation of decrementation, but the result produced on the screen would be 20. That's why we are doing the pre-decrementation, which is placing the both minuses in front, and this is 19 and items also 19. So it's more adequate to our example. Cool. So this is all about a template string. Definitely something worth noting. The ternary operator using a template string is getting more and more common in programming, so also something worth paying attention to and getting used to the syntax. Cool. Thanks for watching.